got one last question for both of you guys, and that's about CRM, I guess, cost creep, if you will. The idea of, hey, this package only costs X dollars a month per user, but then they get a little bit of nickeled and dimed along the way. Do you agree that's happening, and are SMBs getting burned as a result?
I would say that that might be more specific to one or two specific vendors, as opposed to the industry at large. I think there's.
You want to cough up any names?
No, but there's a perception that everything is SaaS today, and I don't think that's true, right? I mean, SaaS is certainly growing, it's certainly the future. There's still plenty of companies that prefer the on-premise model, and it makes the most sense for them, and so.
So when does, because I've been talking to a lot of guys, and most people are just shying so much away from on-premise. When do you think on-premise makes sense?
If somebody already has invested in their IT infrastructure, that's one reason. If they've got security or regulatory requirements that make them be on-premise, or another big one, quite frankly, is integrating with other legacy systems that are already on-premise. As a long-term solution, I believe a lot will be moving towards the cloud, and ultimately we'll probably move into some sort of a hybrid model. However, in the short term, when and if it makes sense is determined also by cost. On-premise is often cheaper than SaaS still in today's market.
On-premise cheaper than SaaS?
Yeah, in many cases it is.
Well, because in many cases you're probably not buying a per-user license, or you are?
Yeah, you are, but if you amortize the investment in some cases over 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is, the actual cost to buy, implement, support on-premise, in many cases, if things go according to plan, is actually cheaper.
All right, so what do you think about it? Is there a creep cost issue happening right now? And do you want to cough up any vendor names you think are guilty?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's creep cost so much as it's a model. The model is what I call a layer cake model. And it's so the idea is you get certain amount of functionality for X, and then if I need this, then I add X plus whatever, and on and on and on as I layer on more functionality. So I don't think there's a lack of value for that. So yeah, that may be the model, and frankly it is the model for some vendors, but I don't know that it's necessarily negative, but there is clearly function creep that relates directly to cost creep over time. So, I guess the other thing to comment on what Brian said around on-premise versus cloud, I think, we always like to focus on cloud because there's, that's the future, and a lot of companies are certainly implementing it that way. But there's still a lot of companies where on-premise is still maybe a good decision, even though over time they may move. And certainly, cloud's growing much faster now than the on-premise side of it. But it really comes down to around investment and how you invest. And the idea that if I may need to pay out of the operating budget, so I'm willing to say I'm going to pay a subscription price over a longer term that probably does cost me more, but it costs me more in smaller increments out of a budget that I can afford versus buying an on-premise app where I have to pay a large amount up front in my capital budget, or I have to try to finance it, which is even more difficult today. And so that's the decision, and companies have to decide where that makes the most sense for them, because it's not really, cost is hard, right? I can say on-premise is cheaper, or I can prove to you that SaaS is cheaper, because it depends on what I add in. If I start to add in hardware and resources and all those other things, I might be able to show you on-premise is more expensive, but again, depends on other things. So it's a complicated question, and I think it depends on what your business needs are more so than anything.
One other quick comment. As it relates to cost creep or scope creep, I would say that we've been talking about the software side of things, but a lot of that happens on the services side of things, right? Where expectations aren't properly set up front, resources aren't properly allocated, planning isn't properly done, nor executed, and I think that's where the majority of the cost creep is, where we see. I mean, the stuff that you mentioned around the software, the subscription becoming more expected, or there's some unexpected costs that are incurred. That certainly happens, but I'd say the biggest part of 200% overruns or 300% overruns is normally related to services, and that gets back to expectations, change management, culture, all the fundamental business challenges that companies face.